word carefully and ironically, it's the first really significant conversation of the 21st century. The problem is that we're not really talking about it, or the people who talk about conversation aren't really interested in conversing. So let me go back to the heart of the ideology. This is the key sentence. I talk about Foo Camp is where the countercultural 60s meets the free market 80s, meets the technophile 90s. All those three things are idealistic. What I don't like about Web 2.0 is it's full of starry-eyed utopians. I have an intrinsic, a gut reaction against idealism of any form, because they're always wrong and they always result in destroying things rather than creating things. I like realists. I like Barry Diller with his nice new building, with real profit, with real companies. And for me, what's interesting about Web 2.0 is it represents this coming together of three different kinds of utopian ideologies. The end result, of course, is utopianism. It's not triple, not squared. What's utopianism to the third, whatever that is, cubed. So yeah, it's a good. So it's utopianism cubed. Most of you don't look like hippies, although when you do these kind of events in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, there are lots of old hippies there. When I say that the Web 2.0 is where the 60s meets the 80s, where the counterculture meets the free market, meets the technophile 90s, what I mean by that is that in this Web 2.0 movement, there is this idealization of community. It's a hippie notion from the 60s. It's no coincidence that many of the leaders, particularly the technological leaders in Silicon Valley, were counterculturalists in the 60s. It's this idealization of an alternative community. And it's bound up in the challenge to authority. Many of the leading ideologists in Web 2.0 challenge formal authority, whether it's the formal authority of traditional media, traditional politicians, traditional leaders, traditional people from organizations like J.W. Thompson. They're challenging authority. It's a movement of youth, a movement of innocence. It's Jimmy Wales who argues that the high school kid knows more than the academic. It's suspicious of people who are older than 30 or 40. It's a suspicious of people who are experts. It's a suspicion of the credentialed. It's idealistic. It's not rooted in reality because, as I hope most of us here know, the world works through and by experts, not by innocents, not by high school kids. The free market 80s. Chris Anderson, my great opponent, the author of The Long Tail, epitomizes the idealization of the free market. It's this notion in Web 2.0, if you just leave everything alone, if you allow the music business and the record business and the journal and the newspaper business and the magazine business, and indeed even the advertising business, to essentially self-destruct, things will naturally work out better. There'll always be a long tail, that the market always results in the best outcome. I'm not sure if that's true. I'm not suggesting necessarily that the state should become involved in this, but I'm not as trusting of the free market. I don't believe that these engines of free market capitalism, like Google and YouTube, are actually benefiting anyone except their owners and their shareholders. I'm very suspicious of the fact that the free market seems to be destroying our independent, autonomous media, destroying our newspapers, undermining our record business, undermining even Hollywood and the publishing business. And in my view, that's not a good thing. In my view, the market doesn't always result in some sort of utopia. We can see that in terms of the environment. We can see it in terms of lots of other social policy. Finally, the technophile 90s. Undermining all this sort of idealization of Web 2.0 is the notion that technology emancipates, that technology liberates. And that's the heart of Web 2.0. It's a kind of semi-Marxist, semi-Rousseauan reading of history. Throughout history, the Web 2.0 people tell us the dominant class, social, cultural, sexual, gendered, whatever else you want to call it, have controlled the commanding heights of the information economy. They're the ones who have decided what books, what music, what movies are made. They have been running their own cultural mafia historically. Finally, the utopians tell us, whether it's idiots like Jeff Jarvis or more serious people like Chris Anderson, that Finally, technology will allow us to do away with this injustice. Finally, the people can get their hands on this technology. Finally, we can all become authors, therefore emancipating ourselves from publishers and editors. Finally, we can all make music and deploy it on the internet. Finally, we can all make movies and destroy, blow up the monopoly of Hollywood. So technology liberates. It allows us to realize ourselves as human beings. In my book, I even quote an early piece from Marx in his German Ideology, which he talks about a post-capitalist society where we can all choose to be farmers in the morning and authors in the afternoon and poets in the evening. That was Revolution 1.0. Now, with Anderson and Jarvis, we have Revolution 2.0. The point of my book is that that's all nonsense on lots of different levels. The point of my book is, firstly, that mainstream media has been doing a pretty good job, that it's been providing us, indeed, I would argue, the sort of glory days of the last part of the 20th century. In the music, the publishing, the movie industry, it has been collectively providing us with high-quality, affordable information and entertainment, whether it's newspapers like the New York Times, whether it's some of the Hollywood movie studios, whether it's the high-quality record labels. They have been providing high-quality entertainment and information, which has been affordable for the masses, whether it was a $10 or $15 paperback book, whether it was a $10 price to your local movie theater, whether it was a CD or a vinyl record. This made culture accessible for everybody. You didn't have to be wealthy. It wasn't a racket of the privileged. And indeed, I argue, I don't necessarily do it explicitly in this book, but I will certainly take the argument today that the people controlling media weren't a socioeconomic or cultural or gendered racket of one kind or another. They weren't a mafia. Most people could get into this business if they worked hard enough and were smart enough. That mainstream media is indeed a meritocracy rather than some sort of aristocratic elite. My second argument is that the Web 2.0 ideal doesn't work. When you do away with the gatekeepers, and I am the ultimate defender of the gatekeeper, the credentialed gatekeeper, whether they're an advertising executive or a publishing person or an editor or an A&R person at a record label, you're essentially destroying the viability of culture in economic terms. The Web 2.0 world out there today does not add up in economic terms. People are not making money out of YouTube. People are not making money out of MySpace. The vast majority of content, whether it's on the blogosphere, whether it's on MySpace, whether it's on any of the other community sites, is free and worthless. People are not handing over cash. So what we're doing is replacing mainstream media, a cash economy in which most of us were comfortable handing over cash in exchange for content. We're replacing it with user-generated trash, which none of us are willing to pay for, and which, for the most part, reflects worthless information and entertainment, which might have some value to the people making it in a narcissistic sense, but has no other value. So overall, I see Web 2.0 as a catastrophe. What we're doing on the one hand is destroying mainstream media, all the value that's been built up over the last century, and replacing it with exploding Coca-Cola bottles, replacing it with anonymous blogs whose authors we have no idea whether they're in the pay of, Al-Qaeda or the New York Times or Walmart. Marion, who am I not supposed to mention today? Those guys are Al-Qaeda aren't one of your clients, right? Sorry? So generally, it's a cultural catastrophe. Now, let me explain what I'm not saying before I move on very briefly to advertising, because there's a lot in this book and I'm rushing through it. I'm not saying that two things, although I might appear to be saying it. I'm trying to have my cake and eat it. Firstly, I'm not saying that all mainstream media is good. I recognize there's a lot of garbage out there. I was working out this morning, and I was watching CNN, and I always thought CNN was good until I watched a half-an-hour news coverage this morning of OJ. I realized that mainstream media is also kind of trashy.